Great idea because you're in there. Okay, welcome. Welcome back, Caitlin. I'm not sure you've met all of us, so I am going to have us introduce ourselves. Hey, Tom.
I am Tom Chittenden. I represent the southeast area of Chittenden County. Sorry.
Dave Wiggins, I represent Rutland County. Nice to meet you.
Randy, you know, represents Franklin, Allison, Windsor District.
Keisha, I usually get to go next so I can say I represent the same district as Tom. Here we are.
All right. Right. Well, and I'm Caitlin Corkins with the Department of Housing and Community Development. And I'm going to be talking about the Downtown and Village Center Tax Credit Program. My colleague Chris Cochran is unfortunately not able to join us today. He was going to talk a little bit more broadly about work that our division is doing.
And the designations.
And, you know, some changes with Act 181. If you have some questions about that, I believe our deputy commissioner
Yeah.
we'll try our best to answer those questions.
Great, but why don't we focus on downtown,
Yes.
which is a key piece of our economic development.
Absolutely. So, as many of you probably already know, the state's designation program recognizes and supports local revitalization efforts throughout the state. We do that with dedicated funding and staff that's designed to help municipalities build strong communities. And these are the current designations that we have: 24 designated downtowns, 249 designated village centers. So the Downtown and Village Center Tax Credit Program is a funding mechanism that is sort of the biggest carrot that we offer through this state designation program. It was created in 1998, and right now we are awarding $3 million annually through the program. To qualify for the program currently, a building must be at least 30 years old and located within a designated downtown and village center. We are in a period of transition with Act 181, which will be changing the way that communities are designated and mapped. But until all that new mapping is in place, we are staying with the current status of the program, where you have to be in one of these designated downtowns or village centers. So I know some of you are maybe less familiar with the program, so I'll just do a really quick overview of what is a tax credit to start off the conversation. So this program offers state income tax credits to offset the investments made in certain types of building improvements within these designated areas. The credits are a percentage based on the amount invested, and then that credit is used to offset income taxes that would be paid to the state of Vermont. The credit can also be carried forward up to 9 years. And this credit can also be sold, and I'll get into that a little bit later in the presentation. And it's a way for basically greater access for the program. So as I mentioned, the credits are a percentage based on the type of work you're doing. We have different sort of types of credits that are available through the program depending on the project. An applicant might access one or more of these credits. And one of my jobs as the program administrator is to help people who are applying apply for the right credit and sort of maximize what they can access through the program.
How many categories for?
We have 4 categories. So I'm going to go through those really quickly right now. The first is our historic credit. So this is specifically for buildings that are not only over 30 years old, but actually historic, listed in the National Register of Historic Places. This 10% credit is built on a similar federal program, the Rehabilitation Investment Tax Credit. So in order to qualify for this specific credit through the state program, you have to apply to that federal program as well and have an approved application.
Any concerns with that of late with the chaos from DC?
That's a really good question. I've been in touch with the folks in Washington that manage that program. They're routinely in contact with our office because I also manage the federal programs for projects in Vermont. So far, things seem to be just status quo. I will say during the last Trump administration, the program continued without really much of a hitch. The thing that was cut was their ability to travel and do trainings and that kind of thing, but just the basic functioning of the program and offering of credits went on.
I'm gonna knock on wood for you.
I know, let's hope that is true this time as well.
And when do we generally receive the federal? When does that sort of get allocated?
So this, because it's a tax credit, applications
Just per
are
project.
on a rolling basis, so people apply whenever they're ready, and then go through that process. When the credit's awarded, they do their project, and then it's certified when all the work is completed.
So I have a proposal for our housing bill that would look at areas of historic preservation that are subjective, largely within the interior of a building, and that are not required by the federal government. Do you, I know you're not SHPO. They must let you know sort of what the line items are that are making up federal requirements.
So I do work for the Division for Historic Preservation.
Okay.
I actually I work in two divisions.
Okay.
So my background is in historic preservation. I do have a master's degree in historic preservation. So like when one of the projects using this program, for example, is a historic building, I would work with applicants to make sure that they meet any of those requirements. And certainly with the federal program, I'm working with folks in DC to make sure that when we're sending applications forward, it will meet all of the requirements for that
Right.
federal program.
I mean, so as we look at funding, I'm looking at your as we look at making our dollars go further, I would need to see that we are putting our dollars towards as many units of housing and stretching them across as many projects as possible. You may have heard, I have asked some of our other stakeholders and witnesses to talk about times in which there have been what they might consider subjective calls made about interior staircases, things like that, that might result in fewer units or greater costs. How can you help us determine where there's state requirements that, frankly, in a housing emergency and with very limited dollars overall, we might look a little more closely at some of those additional burdens?
Well, what I would say is that one of the big parts of my job is helping projects to get through that process of sort of meeting the preservation requirements while putting
The federal preservation requirements.
they're all the same. It's the Secretary of the Interior Standards for Rehabilitation. So the state uses the same requirements as the Park Service does. And so helping people navigate that process to make sure that buildings are going back online, we're maximizing the use of the building. That is a basic goal of both the federal and state programs, is ensure that buildings that are vacant or underutilized are brought back into productive use.
So let's just use that example of interior historic staircases. Are you able to forward me the federal requirement to keep something like that? And my understanding is places like Austin will often focus on the envelope of the building, I mean, even that was my experience in Venice, Italy recently, they make them much more energy efficient and comfortable on the inside and really protect the envelope. So it would really, I would like to see if there is any daylight and if there's any subjective employee input at the state level that might not be on paper, because that's the reports that we're getting. And, hearing about even comfort issues, like you have to leave these chalkboards in a classroom that's going to become housing. That's a concern as we look at repurposing vacant properties, including school campuses, that we focus on tenant comfort and cost over historic preservation that isn't required for a federal grant.
Sure. I mean, what I would say is that this program and the federal program are both voluntary. So, you know, if somebody chooses to use the program, they might have to meet these requirements, but they also have the choice to not access the programs, and then they are free to do, what they want.
But I really want to
They're
be
building.
specific. Are you saying that anything that you are asking people to do is strictly required by the federal government?
If they want the federal.
If they want the credit, yes, that is a requirement of the program that the project meet the preservation standards.
The federal preservation requirements.
Correct.
Okay,
So
To
that,
access.
I
the
just
program.
wanted to,
Can I rephrase it? Can I rephrase
Sorry.
it?
yeah, no, I'm gonna make sure we go on the record on
I'm
this.
pretty
So are there additional state requirements?
On top of the federal?
On top of-
No, there are not.
Can anyone in historic preservation ask for something additional that is not required in the federal requirement?
No.
but what I'm hearing is that you cannot access our historic tax credit without also having been approved by the feds.
This particular tier of the
Okay,
program.
but let's go through the others then, 'cause there are
Yeah.
others that.
Yeah, there are
that
others that where
Okay.
people are not accessing the federal program.
Okay, but this one, at the moment, they do.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
great, then let's see the other three
Nate,
categories.
can you speak to this as well? I mean, I really want to make sure that we are prioritizing units and comfort. And I don't know if there's something we can do in statute. I am looking at introducing something to ensure that is given greater priority. We have had on record testimony, not that there was an argument about whether or not things meet the federal requirements, but that units of housing were lost because of something that appeared on face value to be subjective.
So I think maybe in the other three categories, we can see where that may or may not be applied. But it sounds like this one, for this particular tax credit, you have to be accepted by the feds first.
Right, exactly. And so by that very nature, you have to meet those federal requirements.
Okay, so that seems non-subjective. So let's see what the other three are and maybe that's,
So-
because here's a facade.
We do have projects that don't access the federal program. They don't qualify for it. It's not a historic building. They don't want to apply to the federal program. There are lots of reasons. And so for those folks, there are these other types of credits available. The first one is our facade credit. This is specifically focused on the exterior of the building. It's a 25% credit. It has a cap of 25,000 in credit. For buildings that are historic, again, we want the work on the exterior of the building to meet those preservation standards. But we also have projects that go through this program where the building is old but not historic.
Right.
And in that case, there would be no requirements they have to meet.
The question is, as I understand the tax credits for historic properties, they apply to commercial facilities only. Is that correct?
Actually, nonprofit organizations can also access this program, and I'll talk,
Homes cannot.
private homes cannot, correct?
So what I'm getting at, the question is, an apartment building, that's considered a commercial
Yes,
for these purposes.
yes.
So a multifamily dwelling, how would you define the difference between a private residence and a multifamily? And a multifamily, for example, would a duplex qualify?
The way we would look at that is if it's a duplex where both units are rented, then it absolutely
Yeah.
qualifies for the program. It could even be a single family home that is a rental. That could also qualify. What does not qualify is a unit that's somebody's personal
The
residence.
thing that I own doesn't qualify, of course.
Sorry.
Right, but if you own and lived in the bottom and rented the top, how would you deal with that?
That can get tricky. We could technically give funding to support work in the rental unit of the house. In the case of the facade credit, that gets pretty hard to just parse. But with our next credit, the code credits, that's
Got it.
one where you could, in theory, if you needed to upgrade the electrical for the rental unit, we could support that, just not the electrical in the unit that was your residence.
The application.
But can I go back to the last slide?
Facade.
There is no internal preservation standards that recipient must meet.
If it's a historic building, it has to meet the same requirements as it would the same federal requirements. We use them at the state level as well. It's not a separate state requirement that's in addition to that.
But this does not speak to the internal
Correct.
improvements.
This is for the exterior of the building.
So when
Just the
someone
outside.
from SHPO is coming to look at a project, they just comment on the facade.
If this was the only funding that somebody was accessing, then
Mhm.
yes, we would just be looking at what's the work happening on the
So to
outside.
go back to Keisha's staircase
Yeah,
question, the staircase issue would not be an issue here.
if all they're applying for is the facade credit, yeah.
Yeah,
Correct.
okay, great.
When can I ask?
Yeah.
So I think it gets to this. I mean, when there's conflict between fire safety, ADA, and historic preservation, how do you all help folks resolve?
Yeah,
that?
that's something we do all the time.
I bet you.
All the time. We have really good relationships with Division of Fire and Safety. I regularly do on-site meetings with folks where we're trying to figure out how do we come to consensus on modifying the building so that it's safe and it's accessible, but we're also sort of taking into account the historic character of the building. And so we do that all the time. And I can't think of a scenario where we haven't figured it out.
And what are the other ones? Fire safety, electrical, what other?
So the Division of Fire and Safety is the one that is the
primary.
entity we use to help us with this code credit. So anything they're asking somebody to do to upgrade, whether it's the electrical system or plumbing, accessibility, hazard abatement, adding an elevator or sprinkler system to a building, even things like commercial kitchens. If you're adding a commercial kitchen into a building, you have to
Department of
do.
Health too.
Yes,
So
but
you navigate, what I'm trying to find out is, yes, I know how much you could work with fire safety, but what other, where else have you worked to sort of iron things out?
well, we work with
Department of
the Center for Independent Living, especially when you're looking at accessibility issues.
Yeah,
Those folks are extremely helpful and, when we're trying to figure out how to make the building accessible and fully accessible to everyone. Department of Health has not, because those are usually more like fittings and finishes in the kitchen.
okay.
But certainly like commercial events that need to be installed for a kitchen, that's something the Division of Fire and Safety would require. And so we would work with them on that.
Right. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Randy.
Just if an owner of a commercial building that is historic in nature is considering trying to figure out what their options are, well, short of having a briefing like this, how would they find that out? Where would they look? Is there a pamphlet, a booklet, a
In terms of
website?
like what's available to help
What's available? What's the program consist of? And how do I go about taking advantage of it?
So that's a basic function of the overall like designation program is that we have, in addition to myself, other staff that are available to help people when they're starting a project, say, okay, what kinds of funding sources might be available to help with this project? And that could be, USDA Rural Development, it could be Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, there's a whole myriad of options out there depending on the project.
The RPCs, the RDCs, everybody.
So we
Is there one, for example, it would seem that this would be an ideal opportunity to have one page somewhere available online so that somebody knows what are my opportunities for grants, so on and so forth. I've got a historic property. Where do I look? You can look on historic properties to say, how do I apply for one and so on, but to know that all of this exists, how do they?
Yeah,
They seem to find it because these are most popular tax credits used. in
The
the
question
state.
would be, would more people find it if it were more easily available?
Yeah.
Or,
I mean, we do have a funding directory online that people can access as a starting point. But I agree with you, it'd be great if everybody knew about this. And I think that goes to, if we had marketing dollars, we could get out there and even more.
I mean, a funding directory, I didn't know we had a funding directory.
Yeah,
And
well, the state's website can be a challenge to navigate, but we certainly do our very best to get the word out.
And our RDCs and our RPCs,
Yeah.
most of whom are working on this, and the HFA, everybody is leading. if they're appropriate to be used, leave them developers to.
I get calls from folks all the time that have talked with somebody at their RPC, or they've talked with somebody at their local downtown organization, or even like Division of Fire and Safety, and has come in and said, you need to do this, install a sprinkler system in your building. Hey, you should call Caitlin and see if she can help.
Right.
So luckily, there are a lot of folks around the state who are directing folks my way, which is really helpful.
Which is terrific. And the fourth one
The
is.
fourth one is the flood mitigation credit.
Oh, sorry.
Oh,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm interested in this one as well. From the perspective of all of them, are you seeing any changes at the federal level this year to the requirements, or do you anticipate any?
I don't, we have not seen any changes. The National Park Service did put out guidance back in 2021 regarding flood adaptation of historic buildings, which definitely gives additional flexibility for properties that are in flood prone areas to make changes to protect them from future flood events. This credit that is the newest one that we added to the program in 2023, unfortunately immediately saw a need for it after the flooding in 2023 and then again last summer. So the credit was initially intended to help with proactively making improvements to buildings in flood prone areas to assure that they would be able to be resilient in the face of a flood event. We've actually also been using the credit over the last couple of years to help folks that were impacted by flooding to build back better. So like take utilities out of the basement after it flooded and put new utilities out of the flood zone, making reinforcements to foundations, that kind of
So
thing.
Positive Pie, for example, the
Yeah.
Capitol Plaza, there are a bunch of places in downtown Montpelier that use this tax credit to build back
To
better.
build back, yes, after they were flooded. And then the one on the bottom of the slide here is the Bennington High School, the old Bennington High School that's being converted into housing and community space. They're proactively making some flood improvements to the building so that after they've invested all of this money and brought this building back online, if there's a flood, they hopefully won't have that kind of damage and won't have to be, offline for 6 months a year. So those are the different types of credits. As you can see, it can vary widely in terms of like what type of project, who applies, how much they could apply for. We have giant projects in big towns and we have teeny projects in teeny little village centers. So it really runs the gamut. As I mentioned earlier, that these credits can be carried forward up to 9 years. They can also be sold to banks or insurance companies, essentially to monetize the credit. This allows for nonprofit organizations that obviously don't pay income taxes to still access the program. And to be honest, it also allows small business owners who may not have a lot of tax liability. And so for them, a tax credit is not particularly helpful. They can also choose to sell their credit to a bank or insurance company if that would be more beneficial to them. And so the other great thing about the flexibility of this structure is that it can be kind of a financing tool. So if somebody applies to the program to install an elevator in their building, that's a huge upfront cost, right? They could, if they apply to the program, they're successful, they could take that award letter to their local bank and use it to secure a short-term construction loan. They then do their project and then they pay off the loan by selling the bank their tax credit. So it's a way to get some money into the project early on instead of at the very end after all the work is complete. So currently the program is funded at $3 million annually. The governor's proposed budget increases the funding to $5 million annually. And obviously this is something we're really excited about. This program is very competitive, has been for the 12 years I've been running it. So we never have quite enough funding, and there are lots of good projects every year that we wish we could fund and have not been able to. So this would be a great help.
Yes, absolutely. Some of us have been hoping we would go there sooner.
Yeah.
The one of the things we all love about this program, and you maybe get into it, is how much it leverages So that for every dollar invested, I mean, I feel like we always remember this 17-1 is one of the most successful leverages of our state dollars.
Yeah, that's the average is it's about $17 for every tax credit dollar that the program invests. I included these charts in the presentation just to give you an idea of the demand. I know it's probably kind of small and hard to read, but basically in this, the blue is the amount that's been requested over the past 10 years, and then the red is the cap that we've had available. So as you can see, our cap has slowly been increasing over the years, but the demand has always exceeded that.
Do you see the projects that you don't fund just apply again the following year, or do they move forward without the
Yeah,
funds?
good question.
A lot of them reapply, but there are some that find other ways to go forward, and I have some projects that just then don't happen. Is another thing that we see, unfortunately.
Are
Yeah.
these denials mostly because of, or the ones that you don't get the money to, is it mostly just because there's limited amount of capital, or are you turning them down because they just don't meet the criteria that you stuff?
It's we run out of funding. I can think of very few projects. We do have like a minimum score that projects need to receive in order to be funded, but that pretty much never comes into play because we always run out of money before we get there.
Thank you.
Yeah,
But,
David.
so new guy question, where's the money movement? Like putting a request for 5 million.
Mhm.
In the end, where's the money move? Who's the money moving through and to? It's a credit, it's a tax
Yes,
credit.
yeah.
So where's the money going? Who's the end recipient?
So in the most basic scenario, the applicant who makes the investment receives the credit, and then they use that to offset taxes they would otherwise be paying to the state. It's like an energy credit or, any other kind of tax credit.
Okay,
So we're not writing checks to anybody, like they're getting a certificate from us that they filed when they file their taxes, and it reduces the taxes that they're paying.
so then where's the money flow to our,
It's basically money that's not coming in, rather than money that the state is putting out. It's money we're not taking
right,
in.
it's the money you're not taking in, but does the treasury somewhere receive, is this money going to offset that money, tax money that's not coming in? Like who in the end is the check written?
There's no check written to anybody. It's just,
It's all tax credits
It's
against
just
the Vermont
recognition.
income tax.
yeah, so like, say you had a $500 tax credit, you went and you did your taxes and your tax bill was $1,000. If you had this credit, instead of paying the tax department $1,000, you pay them $500.
Okay, thank you.
So,
And we choose to underwrite that because every tax expenditure is a tax expenditure. We have to figure out how to pay for it. We've chosen to pay for it because it's such a huge value and
I think another point to make about this is that the state is foregoing these taxes that are incoming,
Right.
but the state is also receiving taxes through other ways. So when these projects happen, there's sales taxes that are being paid on materials, there's payroll taxes on people who are employed. So like, while it's very hard to quantify, and we've never really been able to figure out exactly how to quantify, we do think that there's a substantial amount of tax that's coming in because these projects happen.
Well, not only in construction, but I mean, in the grand list value,
Yes.
once the building is back on the grand list,
Correct.
we get back manifold and the number of houses that we create, the number of businesses that have homes as a result. And if this is the committee where we see the entire churn of this, because we see the brownfields that need to be cleaned up. We then see the buildings that are built, we see the tax credits used, and we see new residents, hopefully, and new businesses in our downtowns and village center. There's the idea. Todd.
I heard you say that it's somewhat difficult to measure the broader economic impact of these improvements. I'd be very curious if you could go back 10 to 20 years, if you look at the macro the village center grand list relative to towns that did receive these credits versus towns that didn't. And I would suspect that in my experience, when you improve those downtown cores, those historic buildings, it creates a virtuous cycle. People around there like to also invest, and then that community starts to thrive.
Yeah,
And so other people are ready to invest in other adjacent properties or proximal properties.
I think that's absolutely true.
But you have to perform that kind of thing.
We have looked at grand list values on a sort of one-off basis, like where we funded a project, we've looked at 5 years later, what is the value of that property? And so we know that that property value has increased, but like village center wide, I mean, that would be something we'd have to work with the individual municipality. It probably.
But to go, because Randy's not here, he's meeting with the Consul General of Canada, because the border, all our border counties are working with,
Yeah.
the Consul General today. He would ask this question, so he would, I think it's something we need to begin to figure out how we can measure.
Mm.
Because we can measure the impact in terms of the development if leverage is 17-1, but in terms of long-term impact, economic impact on our downtowns, I mean, we know it's big, but it would be great for us to actually put some numbers to the impact.
Yeah.
And I bet our planning commission could help us.
I think they could. I think the mapping efforts that the
Yes.
RPCs are going to be doing would also be really beneficial in helping us to sort of put our.
Yeah, I'll let you finish, sorry.
No, this is really great questions.
No, but the measurement is.
So this is similar information, just slightly, showed slightly differently, because this is the number of applications we've received versus those we've funded over the past 10 years. And again, the applications we received are in red and the ones we funded are in green. So you'll see that we're perpetually oversubscribed in terms of what we can fund versus what we cannot fund.
And
Yes.
David,
So how do you prioritize?
So there is the Community Investment Board scores the applications. We have scoring criteria that they use, and they take all the applications, review those.
Transparent process.
Absolutely, it's a public meeting that we invite applicants to be there if they like. Now, in this land of like virtual meetings, a lot more people actually can attend these now. Actually, so it's really great.
when you're moment, would you send us the things that are scored?
Sure.
I think it'll be interesting for us to see.
Yeah, absolutely.
And helps us, our constituents, as we work on.
This slide deck is not on our website. It's a different slide deck, not a big deal.
It's here under this.
So I'm just, the slide deck we have for reference is different than what I'm seeing. No big deal.
Oh, because I have it right here at the
I
end.
think maybe what happened is the presentation that Chris was going to give was at the beginning, and then my slides
Yeah,
are
yours the second
are
half.
at the end, so it's like further down.
I have it
I'm
here.
not seeing that.
Oh,
It's not
okay.
at the end of it.
No big deal.
Okay.
I'm sure we can fix that.
So thanks, because I have it here, Tom. So I was thinking it was all up there. Okay.
So I just wanted to finish with a few
Yeah.
examples of recent projects that were completed to give you sort of a flavor of what we've been able to do with the program. This is a project down in Brattleboro. As you can see, it was a pretty large one, 10.3 million total. This project included both the federal and the state tax credits. So in total, about 2.1 million in tax credits available to support the project. And this created, I just want to make sure I have the right number, 15 new units of housing right in downtown Brattleboro, along with some first floor community co-working space. This is more of a mid-sized project that was completed up in St. Johnsbury. Former Kaplan store, which I know was like a community institution, and people were very sad when they went.
I just found it.
And so then this is a vacant storefront right in the middle of their downtown. This project was to help make some small minor facade improvements, but really the bulk of the project was in bringing the building up to code to allow a new health clinic to open right in the downtown. And there is actually a second small retail space as well. They divided the building into 2 commercial units.
And when was this finished? Because I feel like I saw this before it was finished.
I think it was like in the fall.
Yeah, no, it's recent.
It's
Because
recent.
I remember it as
The army store, yeah.
So that's exciting.
That's
to see.
a recent one, yeah. And then the last one I wanted to share is the Gray Building in Northfield. So this is a former school. It's actually owned by a nonprofit organization, the building is, and they lease space in the building to a number of different entities for offices and that kind of thing. There was a child care center that was interested in renting a portion of the building to offer childcare right in downtown Northfield. In order to accommodate that, they had to make some code improvements to the building to meet the childcare requirements. And so this was a pretty small project. It was just, they needed to make these code improvements so that they could rent the space to the childcare center. So, under a 24,000 total project, and the tax credits were able to offset half of the cost of that project.
That's great. And so how many kids do we now have taking care of
That's a
here?
very good question.
Okay, yeah, but we're also wanting to build that, so that our childcare capacity is.
I don't have the actual number in my notes, but I'm sure I can get that for you. So that was all the slides that I have, but if there are more questions, I'm so happy to take more questions.
Well, I just want to say, I very much appreciate this program and what you do. I think, the reason I'm raising concern now is that it did state historic preservation no favors that one of your previous employees was privately suing the city of Burlington over a non-historic church in downtown Burlington, and driving up the cost of housing when that project is completed in our downtown. So I know he's no longer with State Historic Preservation, but that's the kind of stuff that makes this really hard, is that we want to make sure that we're working in partnership to make it more affordable for people to live and work in our downtowns. And that was hard to see a city I represent sued in someone's private time. But it was not a historic building, and it went to the Supreme Court. And that just adds a lot to the cost of housing and makes people concerned that there's more subjectivity than there should be.
Right.
So I do plan on continuing to ask these questions and putting forward legislation, because we do need to balance our the importance of our facades and the aesthetic of our downtowns and village centers with the housing crisis that we're facing and the cost of housing.
And I think my impression is that your office has been absolutely appreciative of that balance. I mean, I don't think
Well, that's why I was trying to raise a very specific example.
yeah.
That was really, it was very concerning in Burlington that was happening.
Yeah,
And people are allowed to do what they want on their private time, but that really hurts the cause.
and hard for a public
I
employee.
think the one thing I would just say is that empty buildings don't serve anyone. They leave money on the table. It doesn't actually serve the cause of preservation either, because a vacant building is much more likely to become dilapidated, get torn down, get burnt down. I mean, we want to see these buildings occupied and lived in and used. So that is definitely a big goal of all the projects that we're working.
So after crossover, we're going to have a field trip, and we already have honey. I'd love us to go. There are a lot of things we need to go see, but we might want to see one of these in process, or that would be close enough by, because I think we're going to. I'm hoping we'll do Huntington Homes, and we have a bunch of.
Okay, you tell me where you're going, and
Yeah,
I'll
Monday one when we're not all here. But yeah, okay, right.
Yeah.
Any other questions for downtown tax credits? Used all in every village and downtown center. We do not. I don't think there's a place that hasn't equitably applied.
Every county in the state, for sure.
Right. Great.
Wonderful.
Nate, would you like to add anything?
No, this is a great team. They do a lot of great work. And Senator noted on what you're saying, and we can continue having those conversations, I think.
Yeah. No, it's important. Yeah. We're in a housing crisis.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Really appreciate, and please let Chris know. We can all let Chris know as well. I'm sure he may or may not be listening. But Chris, we hope you get better.
Yeah.
And we will have him back at some point. So thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Okay. We have an extra 20 minutes, which we had not anticipated. So, and we've tried a bunch of different people to come and have join us, but at the last minute. So, one thing that I believe we have printed out, one thing I thought we might do is take up a bit of what we were going to talk about tomorrow and look at Keisha's second labor bill, which is 25-0653, an act relating to employee rights. Is that okay? We have them printed.
Yeah, no, and
653.
well,
Yes.
because I also handed you my summary sheet, which is
We can make
that
copies
has
of that quickly.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, we can, and we have a summary that Sophie has.
Yeah, I mean, I think we.
Thank you very much, you guys.
Do you want to look at that? Do you want them to have this or not?
Sure, yeah, okay, yeah.
We
But
have
is
this
it
already.
all the bills or is it 653?
This is before. I have them separate.
Oh, okay.
So,
I think hand them both out.
okay, all right. All right, like,
Okay,
so want one?
We don't have the printed out bill, so this is it.
It's 653. It'll show up online tomorrow because they're supposed to actually be in town there tomorrow.
So we have, and then you already have this from Sophie, the David and Tom. You have this from Sophie, and so there's also a summary.
That's kind of what I'm
Oh, that's what you're working on.
working off of, so I don't get it too deep into the weeds.
Right.
So we yesterday got through there,
We got through your first bill.
the 652.
Yeah.
Okay.
So 653 would be great if
Yeah.
we can just at least for a few
Yeah.
minutes.
No, I mean,
Take a few-
I think I can get through 653 and 654 pretty fast.
Great, and then we can actually then tee up a couple of
Mhm.
witnesses instead.
So I would get, I will say I've given Heidi, a witness list for each of these, not even a witness list, just one person for each. Because these are things where I've received outreach or they're holdovers from last biennium. We looked at good cause for termination. Senator Chittenden, you raised that yesterday, if someone's terminated for cause or not. But we are a relatively, at will state in some ways by not having a good cause standard for termination of employment. We looked at language last year that was way too complicated.
Yeah.
And David Mickenberg was pointing out for me and for Sophia, she drafted that there's much simpler language that you'll see in the draft that is similar to what at least a couple other states have done.
And that is pretty much what 653 is about, is
Well, I mean, there's
Good
meaty,
cause.
the other two sections are pretty meaty as well, I guess.
Right.
Probably because people will have things to say about them. They probably come across as harmless or common sense on face value, but we always hear interesting things opposing views. We have looked at non-compete agreements in the past. I also might recommend Rich Cassidy.
yes, who
Um,
came
who
before.
came before because he was part of a national review of non-competes across all industry sectors. And I think it's like a big uniform commercial code. Hi, Sophie. Well, I was going through my own thing. I was on non-compete.
We had 20 minutes, and so we thank you for joining us. We're just walking through 0653. Come join us.
Okay. So Rich Cassidy was part of a national group looking at all non-competes, and the Uniform Commercial Code group is a lot of different stakeholders and perspectives and a lot of attorneys in one room. And they actually came to a place where that group had agreed on non-compete language for a national standard and for states to adopt. And I'd love for him to come in and present that. Because it was an answer to federal work that was going on that was then folded. I think the request I received was specific to healthcare. The witness I offered has a lot of examples of where this is already in effect in other states. But non-competes are being used a lot more often. They limit people's economic potential, especially in a small state, and they might in certain industries limit access to healthcare and things like that. So that
Section 2 doesn't look. am I missing something? It doesn't look like it's limited to healthcare.
Oh, I might have asked Sophie to draft it as all of it.
Right,
So Sophie, would you, yeah,
yeah, there was another bill request involving non-competes in general, so I had chatted with Senator Ron Ansdell about, did you want it limited just to healthcare or more
Good, so it's
expansive?
broader.
This is the more
yeah,
expansive.
it looks
Great.
like it, yeah.
And yeah, so I mean, I think, I personally think it should be, you know,
that
we
puts
should look
you-
at all non-competes.
that puts
So
you-
a lot of those like there. The third part of this bill was a constituent request to review, so I forwarded the name of that constituent to Heidi. You know, this seems to be something that we could at least look at. We've looked at a lot of, I mean, having been on the labor committees for over 14 years, or I guess 13 years now in some form or fashion. We have looked at employment breaks and just things that are, you know, give people, you know, basic human dignity and comfort in work. And if someone can perform the duties of their job while sitting, I thought that was worth looking at.
So to that end,
Mm-hmm.
you'll see on this little chart at the bottom, a constituent request that may or may not be simple, that it also adds
Yeah.
to the comfort of working in extreme cold weather.
I know. I talked to Sophie about this, about climate distress and extreme heat, extreme cold, flooding events that we saw while we were out of session, where people tried to leave work in time to avoid a flood and died in the process. Not in our state, obviously, but elsewhere. I think it's worth looking at. I keep hearing from the unions that they feel like the sectors that involve that type of work are it's addressed, UPS workers, et cetera. But
So we do have language on that last bit about extreme cold. That I've actually sent this to the ski industry and they're looking at it as well because they all have employee handbooks. There is, so we're going to hear from them as well about this.
Yeah.
So I think, anyway, I'm waiting to hear back from them. But Sophie has identified a possible simple fix to this, which we can look at when we dive into the language.
Well, that was just the constituent that reached out to you,
Yeah.
just had just a tweak to just the general sort of safety and health
Mhm.
statute, because some of the other things that have been floating around is doing a much more extensive,
Right.
huge, you know,
Yeah.
kind of
But
bill
this-
addressing
right.
extreme
So,
temperatures
and
on either end.
I think one of the other things we touched on is that VOSHA is just kind of a pass through of OSHA regulations right now. So we don't have significant infrastructure on our own state and health safety standards. It's complaint driven, and we simply enforce OSHA rules and regulations. So I think if we are worried about OSHA, if we want to look more deeply at VOSHA, that's like maybe a bigger question, and tweaks might be the simple fix until we have.
So maybe we can do this and then if we get it to the house, there can be more work done and then we can figure it out.
Yeah,
we
so
can
at the
get that
national level, there was on heat, not cold, but there was
Yes, there.
Department of Labor had come up with rules.
Right.
But again, I think that all that's on hold. And my sense from just generally out there, you know, different people speculating about what will happen. I think there's a sense that what was put out by the Department of Labor will probably not move forward, but that the new administration will likely come up with something. It would be a different version, but they may well come up with something to deal with heat. But that one is focused on hot temperatures, not cold temperatures.
So maybe we start here. Okay.
The next bill, I don't.
Okay, let's pull it up. It is the one.
654. So I hesitate to call this kind of cleanup, but I don't think you'll find, like questions of major moral philosophy addressed here. But I think it is a question right now, the strength of our Vermont Labor Relations Board, given what's happening with the National Labor Relations Board, just, where are we in ensuring that our Labor Relations Board is a functioning institution? And people have raised questions and concerns about that they want to address. this is the second biennium that there has been a request for assistant attorneys general to have the right to collectively bargain. I'm not saying that because we dismissed it last year. I feel like it got lost in
It
the
sort of got
shuffle. They
lost.
started in the House and we didn't get it in time. So there, the person who is part of that organizing effort is the
So,
witness I would.
We need to hear from the VSEA and David.
Yeah, and I would say the other three, the VSEA could probably start out with our testimony. The Labor Relations Board could start out because Sophie was able to ask our VLRB director, what is, are you experiencing resource needs that you can attest to? And so we're trying to sort
Yeah,
through
and I think
that.
she testified in front of the agricultural worker study committee that, it's just her as the executive director. She's the only full-time employee, and then
Of the
there's a
Labor Relations
yeah, and then there's a part-time assistant. And she was saying, in front of that committee, another full-time attorney would be enormously helpful in addressing some of the issues in the backlog.
So that's section. Yeah.
So this has it
That's
section,
section 4
right,
on page 7.
would be just increased funding for a position. Or to increase staff.
Right. So what we will do if people have, I think we're going to have to begin to get a sense of, after we hear a little bit about these from witnesses, what we have, what we're ready to move on. And we will, instead of walking through tomorrow, we will work on trying to get some witnesses in to do this. And then, Sophie, if you're available, we can quickly walk through them, maybe the just language or not. But mostly I think we'd like to hear from the people who are asking. Right.
And I'll just say for committee and on the record, my practice has generally been to just draft language without introducing a bill. It was last year as chair. I don't know if it's just stylistic, but for me, it also mattered last biennium to try and get everyone's buy-in and make it a committee bill. So,
Yeah.
if there are pieces that you disagree with, that's really open for discussion and debate. I really worry that with a quick shift to a very different makeup, there aren't as many people who remember the days when we were, compromising and negotiating, and that's a really important part of what we do. I'll get off my soapbox now, but it's just that I don't want people to feel like this is yes or no. This is let's work on it. Let's go to the cafeteria. Let's hash it out.
And also I think we all have to respect when constituents and work is brought to the table. It isn't necessarily just us bringing to the table. It's our constituents and it's past work. In this case, it's a bunch of pieces of past work and constituents.
Right.
And I think we have to honor that. So even if you disagree with it, we at least need to be able to discuss it. So.
I guess what I'd say is just, I need time to
Yeah,
process. things,
absolutely.
so I-
Yeah.
Just
So-
give me an idea of what you want to take a vote so that I can work.
Well,
back, Yeah.
we're nowhere near that.
Before
Yeah.
crossover, maybe.
which is
So-
after town meeting week, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, but yes, we have a week to vote bills out of our.
We have until Friday the 14th to
That's
vote
right.
things out of our committee.
Correct.
We will be,
Unless they need to go to another policy committee.
even, that's a question. And given the time frame of this,
Yes.
that may
I'm
be what
going
we're
to be
asking
asked.
for is a break on that. Because
Yeah.
it's gonna be hard enough to get all 3 of our Hope Committee bills out
Mhm.
by the 14th. But that will work. So I think, unless there are other questions about this,
I think we're gonna be here till June, so we can take a little bit longer.
thank you.
All good.
Well, then, the question is, do we rush through March if we are confident of that? And I think maybe there's dispensation involved.
Okay, we may hope. Anyway, on that optimistic note, we are going to say goodbye to whoever